As we begin Chapter 3, we will discuss simple interest. To calculate simple interest, your formula is simply interest is equal to principal times rate times time. And your principal is the amount invested. Your rate is going to be your interest rate, and it will always be an annual simple interest rate, but you need to use the decimal form for it. And T is going to represent time in years. So if they happen to give you the time in months, you will need to make the conversion into years before you plug into the formula. More often, instead of just calculating the amount of interest, you're going to be asked to calculate possibly the final amount in an account after a certain period of time. You can see that the formula for that is the final amount would be equal to P, your starting amount, times, and then in parentheses, you'll see 1 plus rate times time, okay? Or another way of thinking of it is your final amount is your principal plus the amount of interest. Now, if we look at some examples here, we're going to practice plugging in, make sure we understand the formula. Also, remember, if you're looking for an amount of money, it needs to be rounded to the nearest cent. So you would round 2 places to the right of your decimal. Number 1 says if Miss Gonzalez borrows $500 for 2 years from a bank that charges 3% annual simple interest, how much interest will she owe at the end of the 2 years? How much in total, which is your interest plus your principal, would she pay to the bank at the end of the 2 years? So you've got 2 different things it's asking you to find. The first is the amount of interest, which we said we can calculate if we multiply principal times rate times time. So she's borrowing $500. The interest rate that she's being charged is 3%, but remember, you have to convert that to decimal form. And the way you do that is you drop the percent and move your decimal 2 places to the left. So that turns into 0.03, and we're wanting to find how much interest she owes at the end of 2 years. So T is 2. Now, if you put all that in your calculator and you multiply it out, you'll see she owes $30. So the question, how much in total will she pay to the bank at the end of the 2 years? We're going to have to add the principal plus the interest to get the total. So that's 500 plus 30. She'll owe $530. Fairly simple. It's very straightforward when you're working with simple interest. Next example. Mr. and Miss Smith are running short of money this month. They decide to borrow $1,000 from the bank and repay the money in 6 months when they get their income tax refund check. The bank charges 8% annual simple interest. How much interest will they owe at the end of the 6 months, and how much will they have to pay? So it's the same process. I equals PRT. They're going to borrow $1,000, but this time, look at the interest rate. It's 8% annual simple interest. That's 0.08. And I think you're going to see, I know you're going to see, as the interest rate goes up, it's going to make a much bigger impact on the amount that you're going to pay. That's sort of intuitive. Now, the thing that's working in their favor is they're only borrowing the money for 6 months. But remember, time has to be in years. So there are 6 months that they're going to pay interest on out of 12 months in a year. That's going to be 0.5 or 1/2 for time. So now if you multiply all of that together, it's going to cost them $40 to borrow that money for 6 months. Okay? And that means the total amount that they're going to owe the bank at the end of the 6 months will be the $1,000 they borrowed plus the $40 in interest, so that's $1,040. The next question wants us to find the amount needed to pay off a simple interest loan of $3,000 at 6% for 1.5 years. Now, it didn't ask us to find the interest. It asked us to find the total amount. So you could do it the other way, but an all-in-one way to get the answer is to use this formula. A equals P times 1 plus R times T. That allows us to calculate the interest and add it into the principal at the same time. So we're going to be borrowing $3,000. So that goes in for P. Our interest rate is 6%. So again, drop the percent, move your decimal to the left. That becomes 0.06. Now we need to convert 1.5 years. I would recommend go ahead and convert it into a decimal, which would be 1.5. That'll just make it easier when you put it in your calculator. So now, if you're putting this in your calculator, and here's where you want to be a little bit careful with calculator entry, you either need to use the parentheses, the way that we've written them down when you type it in the calculator, or you need to make sure that you enter this correctly for order of operations. In other words, I would take care of what's inside parentheses before I do anything else. Well, inside this parentheses, I've got 1 plus, and then I have two numbers being multiplied together. You multiply before you add. Remember, order of operations is PEMDAS. Parentheses, then exponents, multiplication and division count equally, and then addition and subtraction count equally. So we have to do these in order as we see them. So when I start with the parentheses, inside the parentheses I have to multiply before I add. So you'd want to do this first, add 1 to it, hit enter, and then you can multiply it times 3,000 at the very end. And that would give you $3,270. If you're having any trouble with calculator entry, please contact me. And based on the calculator you're using, we can try to help you get through that so that you're doing it correctly. Next question is similar, but we're kind of looking at it from the reverse perspective. We don't want to know how much money we're going to have at the end of an account. Instead, we want to know how much money would have to be invested today if we're earning 6% simple interest in order to have $4,000 in 2 years. Now that's a helpful thing to be able to figure out, because you may want to know how much money do I need now if I'm going to replace my car in a couple of years, or if I need to pay for tuition for college. So we still use the same formula, but this time we're not going to be solving for A. We already know how much we want to have as our final amount. That's going to be $4,000. What we don't know is the P. How much money do I need to have now to invest for it to turn into $4,000? So P stays as my variable. My interest rate in decimal form is 0.06, and my time in years is 2. So this is what it looks like when I get it plugged in. Now again, order of operations tells me that I start inside the parentheses, and I'm going to have to multiply before I add. So 0.06 times 2 is 0.12. When I add that to 1, I get 1.12. Now I can divide each side by 1.12, and that is what needs to go into my calculator. So if I take 4,000 and I divide it by 0.12, 1.12, sorry, then I'm going to have $3,571 rounded to the nearest cent becomes 43 cents. You should have 0.428571. And if you have 0.4285, if I'm rounding to the nearest cent, that's 2 places to the right. I have to look at the digit that comes after that to decide whether to round up or just drop off those extra digits. So that's a quick reminder. As long as it's 5 or above, I round up. If it's below 5, then I'll drop those extra digits off. That's the principal that's required to have $4,000 in 2 years. Let's look at Mary's situation. She has $2,700 in a simple interest account that pays 4.5%. She would like to have $3,000 for a down payment on a new car. So how long will it take Mary to have $3,000 in the account? Well, let's help her out. We know this is our formula, A equals P times 1 plus R times T, which, by the way, you may be wondering, uh-oh, I'm starting to see formulas. Do I have to have these memorized for the test? I will provide a formula sheet that you get to use when you test, but you're not allowed to use any notes, only the formula sheet. So I will give you the formulas, but you do need to know how to plug into them correctly. Now, on this problem, do we know the A? Yes, we do. She wants to have $3,000. Do we know the P? Yes, we do. She already has $2,700. Do we know the R, the interest rate? Yes, we do. It's 4.5%, which becomes 0.045 in decimal form. What we don't know is the time, how long it will take her to turn this $2,700 into $3,000. So this is what it looks like when you have it all plugged in. Now, again, we want to look at order of operations in order to solve this. We've got a couple of options on how we can do this. When I look inside the parentheses, I really don't have anything much that I can do because there's a variable here with the t. That means 1 plus 0.05t, 0.045t is as simple as the parentheses can get. Now, I do have an option as to whether I would want to multiply and distribute through the 2,700, or because these are being multiplied together, I can divide each side by 2,700 because multiplication and division count equally, so I can decide which way I want to go. The benefit to doing this is that I will not have to distribute, and if I take 3,000 divided by 2,700, I get 1.111 that repeats is equal to 1 plus 0.045t. Now, I'm solving for t, so I have to subtract 1 from each side, and that gives me 0.111 that's repeating is equal to 0.045 t. To solve for t, I have to divide each side by 0.045. Now, at this point, if you still have the 0.111 in your calculator, it's better to leave all those extra digits and then divide that by 0.045. If you're typing this in, be sure you type in 0.11111. Get at least 6 or 7 places to the right of the decimal typed in. And we come up with a value of t that is about 2.4 0.69 dot dot dot, which if I'm rounding to the nearest tenth of a year, that would be one place to the right. So that would be about 2.5 years, around 2.5 years. Well, we now have a situation where Mr. Wong's daughter needs to borrow $700 from him for her textbooks. Kind of sad that she's going to be borrowing $700 from Daddy for textbooks, but he does agree to the loan, and he tells her that she has to pay back $750 in 6 months. What simple interest rate is Mr. Wong charging his daughter? Let's see if he's being a kind-hearted daddy or if he's kind of putting the screws to her. Well, we can figure that out if we use our formula. A equals P times 1 plus R times T. And we do know what the final amount is she has to pay back. That's $750, so that goes in for A. P is the amount she borrowed, which is $700. 1 plus, do we know the interest rate? No, that's what we want to find. So we're going to have to leave R as our variable, but I do know the T. She's paying this back in 6 months. Remember, time has to be in years. So 6 divided by 12 is 0.5, half of a year. Okay, again, we can do this either way. You can distribute first, or you can divide. This time I think I'll show you what happens if you distribute first. So if I multiply everything in the parentheses by 700, and when I say multiply everything in the parentheses, I have 2 terms here, and I know that because I see a plus sign. And one of the values being added is a number, it's 1. The other one has a variable in it, it's R. They're not like terms. That's why it's going to stay as 2 different terms in that parentheses. And I get 750 equals 700 times 1 is 700. Plus, if I multiply 700 times 0.5, that's 350 times R. So here's what we have right now. If we subtract 700 from each side, then 50 is equal to 350 times R. And if I divide each side by 350, look at the interest rate he's charging. If I round it to the nearest tenth, it's about 14.2% interest. And that's a simple interest rate. Okay, Mr. Wong is not being terribly kind to his daughter. That's a pretty high interest rate. All right, here's a situation that everybody needs to pay attention to. I understand sometimes you get in a bind and you may be tempted to go and get a payday loan or go to one of these, quick cash places. You really need to be careful and think about what it's actually costing you if you do that. Look at this scenario. Mr. Jones goes to a check cashing business to get money before his paycheck is due. The business charges him $25 up front to loan him the money 1 week before payday. Now, if his paycheck is $550, what is the annual simple interest rate that the business is charging him? Okay, now I realize you can look at that and think, $25, that's not a big deal. But you want to pay attention to what this interest rate is because you need to be smart with your money. So if we were to calculate this, the amount that he is actually going to have to pay, you know what? Actually, what we could do on this one, we don't have to know the final amount, but we could do this. We could use I equals PRT. And one of the reasons this could be helpful is because is it easy to see what the amount of interest is he's being charged? What's the fee that they have charged him? It's this $25. Now, the principal is the amount of his paycheck. That's the amount that he got in advance. And that's $550. What we'd like to find is what's the interest rate they're charging him if he's having to pay the $25. Now, time, you're going to have to be careful because he got the money 1 week before payday. How many weeks are in a year? Well, there are 52 in a year, so 1 out of 52 is going to be my time. Okay? So here's what you would have if I take the 550 and I divide that by 52, because that's what happens if I multiply 550 times 1 over 52. I'm going to have 10.5769 R equal to 25. Now if I solve for R, if I take 25 and I divide it by that 10.5769, I'm getting 2.3636. That just keeps on repeating. Before you think, 2% interest, that's not bad, remember, it's giving you the interest rate in decimal form. To turn it back to percent form, you got to move that decimal 2 to the right and put the percent sign back on it. That means you are paying 236% simple interest. Okay, that is a lot of interest. And in fact, if you've paid attention in the news, the state has tried to crack down on these payday loan places because they are taking such advantage of people who need quick money. And, title loans with your car, same type of thing. You can find yourself in such a hole you can't get back out of it if you're not careful. So please think about it carefully. Pay attention to what's actually being charged. Okay, here's another example. A late charge on a utility bill can be interpreted as an interest charge. If John's water bill is $85 and there's a $2.50 charge for being late, what annual simple interest rate is being charged if John pays the bill 2 weeks late? So again, this one is easy to calculate what the interest amount is because they've told us that charge, and he has to pay $2.50 as a late fee. Okay? Now, if his water bill is $85, that's the principal amount. And we're trying to calculate what the interest rate is he's being charged if he's paying this bill 2 weeks late. Now, we just did this a minute ago. There are 52 weeks in a year. This time, he's going to be using 2 of those 52 weeks. So this is what our formula looks like when we plug in. Now, if I go through, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to put this in your calculator. You can think of this as 85 over 1 times R times 2 over 52. You can multiply 85 times 2, divide that by 52. That will tell you what number is being multiplied times R. And then you can take 2.5 and divide it by that number. I'm purposely not writing all this out because I want you to see if you can figure out how to get it in your calculator yourself. You will come up with a decimal value this time, 0.7647, ... And again, it's in decimal form, so if you turn it back into percent form, that means you are paying about 76.5% simple interest. That is a high rate. I understand $2.50 doesn't sound like much for a late fee, but the percent is simple interest. And honestly, most of the time now, if you have to pay a late fee, it's not going to be $2.50. It is probably going to be more like $15, $20, $25. So you can imagine what would be the interest rate that you've actually paid on something like that. So be smart about your money and be careful with making sure that it works for you and you're not wasting money through bad decisions.